Ladies and gentlemen, we stand today at the threshold of a remarkable truth, one that if embraced with an open heart will change the course of our lives. We are told in the scriptures that God is doing a new thing. This message, though ancient, is timeless, calling each of us into a deeper understanding of our purpose. As God's chosen ones, we are not mere observers in this world, we are active participants in the unfolding of His divine plan. God's transformative power is something beyond our natural comprehension. When we speak of God doing a new thing, we are referring to a divine intervention in the world, a force that reshapes the course of human lives and even alters the very fabric of reality. This power is not static or limited to particular times or places. It is a continuous, active force that seeks to make all things new. The process of transformation is not merely the improvement of what is already present, but the introduction of something entirely fresh, something that emanates from the very heart of God's will. At the core of this transformation is the idea that God's power is redemptive. It seeks to reclaim what is broken, to heal what is wounded, and to restore what has been lost. When we speak of God doing a new thing, we are acknowledging that He is never bound by the confines of the past. Our past mistakes, our struggles, and even the wounds we carry with us are not barriers to His transformative power. Instead, they are the very elements through which His grace works. God does not simply overlook our past, He uses it as the raw material through which He creates something new and beautiful. This divine transformation is not only external but internal as well. It reaches deep into our hearts, our minds, and our spirits, reshaping who we are at the core. We are not merely changed in our outward circumstances or surroundings, but we are changed in our very essence. It is the kind of change that is profound, the kind that alters how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we relate to others. Through God's transformative power, we become more aligned with His purpose, more attuned to His will, and more capable of living out the fullness of who He created us to be. Yet this transformation often does not occur in a way that we might expect. It is not always immediate or obvious. The power of God works in mysterious ways, and His methods are not always in accordance with our understanding. Sometimes the transformation comes slowly, like the gradual unfolding of a flower, requiring patience and trust. Other times it can be sudden and startling, breaking through the walls we have built to protect ourselves. But always it is a change that is for our good. It is the kind of change that moves us closer to the life He has always intended for us, one that is marked by love, purpose, and wholeness. The power of God to make all things new is not a passive event, it is an active invitation for us to participate. To be transformed by God requires our cooperation. We must be willing to yield to His guidance, to surrender our control, and to trust in His wisdom. While His power is infinite and unstoppable, we must still open ourselves to receive it. We must allow Him to reshape us, to mold us, and to guide us into the new thing He is doing. This requires humility, faith, and a willingness to let go of the old in order to embrace the new. The beauty of this transformation is that it is not just a solitary experience, it is one that affects everyone around us, as God's transformative power ripples out into the world through us. To be chosen by God is a concept both deeply humbling and profoundly empowering. It is an invitation to a life of purpose, a life where we are not simply drifting through the world but are actively engaged in fulfilling a divine calling. Being chosen means that God has seen something in us, something that makes us capable of bearing His truth, His light, and His love to those around us. It is not a matter of merit but of grace. God, in His infinite wisdom, selects us not because we are worthy, but because He chooses to empower us with the potential to become what He has always intended us to be. This act of being chosen is not just a recognition of individual worth, but a call to a collective mission. As God's chosen ones, we are invited into the broader narrative of His redemptive work in the world. This is not an isolated experience, but one that connects us to the larger story of God's unfolding plan for humanity. We are part of something much bigger than ourselves, a movement that spans generations, cultures, and nations. To be chosen means to be a vessel through which God works to bring healing, restoration, and hope to a world in need. It is a responsibility that extends beyond our personal lives and into the lives of others. We are chosen not merely for our own benefit, but for the good of all. The privilege of being chosen is accompanied by a unique responsibility. God does not call us to this life simply to exist. He calls us to make a difference. This responsibility is not one that burdens us, but one that empowers us to live with intentionality, to step forward into the world with confidence, knowing that we are not walking alone. We are given the strength to face challenges, the wisdom to make decisions, and the courage to speak out for what is right. The weight of responsibility is not something to fear, but something to embrace, for it is in fulfilling this responsibility that we find the true meaning of our existence. In this calling, we are also reminded that being chosen is not about perfection, nor is it about having all the answers. It is about the willingness to follow God's lead, to trust in His plan, and to accept the journey He sets before us. We are chosen despite our flaws and imperfections, not because we are without fault, but because God desires to use our very weaknesses to manifest His strength. Our imperfections do not disqualify us. In fact, they are the very places where God's grace is most powerfully displayed. The process of being chosen is a process of transformation, one where we are shaped and molded not by our own efforts, but by the guiding hand of the Creator. Being chosen by God is also an act of love. It is a love that calls us to something greater, a love that invites us into a deeper relationship with Him. As we respond to this love, we are drawn closer to God's heart, and it is from this place of intimacy that we are empowered to fulfill the mission He has entrusted to us. It is a love that calls us to love others in return, to reflect the very love we have received. The beauty of being chosen is not just in the act of selection, but in the deepening of our connection to the one who chooses us. It is a love that sustains us, strengthens us, and compels us to live lives of service and sacrifice. The nature of renewal, particularly when God is said to be doing a new thing, is both a profound mystery and an incredible opportunity. It speaks to a divine process that goes beyond the surface level of our circumstances and touches the very heart of our existence. Renewal is not just about an outward change, such as a new job, a new relationship, or a new place to live. It is at its core a deep spiritual transformation that reshapes our very way of being in the world. When God promises to do a new thing, He is calling us into a deeper, richer experience of life, one that reflects His glory and His goodness in ways that we may not yet understand. To be renewed by God is to be invited into a process of complete metamorphosis. This renewal often begins with a recognition of the old, of the brokenness, the sin, the hurts, the regrets, and the limitations that we carry. It is a humbling acknowledgement that we cannot, by our own efforts, make ourselves whole. We cannot create the new thing on our own. But it is precisely in this recognition of our own insufficiency that God's power becomes most evident. For in our weakness, His strength is made perfect. The renewal He offers does not deny the reality of the old, rather, it redeems it, transforming what was once a source of pain into a source of pain, into a source of strength and wisdom. Renewal also involves a shift in perspective. It is not merely a change in our circumstances, but a change in how we view those circumstances. God's new thing often calls us to see the world through His eyes, to understand the events of our lives through the lens of His eternal purpose. This shift is not always immediate or easy. We are naturally inclined to see things from a finite human perspective. We often view challenges, failures, and hardships as obstacles to our happiness or success. But through God's renewal, we are invited to see these very things as opportunities for growth and transformation. What we once saw as setbacks can become the fertile ground where the new thing takes root. Part of the renewal process also involves a reorientation of our desires and priorities. In this new thing that God is doing, we are not simply being upgraded to a better version of our old selves. Rather, we are being invited into a radically different way of life, one that is centered not on our own desires and ambitions, but on God's will and purposes. This reorientation is not always easy. It requires a willingness to surrender our own plans and submit to God's plan. It involves letting go of our preconceived notions about what we want and opening ourselves to the possibility that God's vision for us is far greater than anything we could have imagined. The nature of this renewal also speaks to the ongoing process of transformation. God does not simply make us new once and for all. He continues to renew us day by day. It is a continual process of growth and refinement, one that may be painful at times, but is always for our ultimate good. Just as a seed must break open to become a plant, so too must we be broken in order to experience the fullness of renewal. Yet this breaking is not destructive, it is redemptive. Through it, we are made more fully alive, more fully attuned to God's presence, and more fully capable of living the life He has designed for us. In essence, the nature of God's renewal is both a present and future reality. It is not a distant hope, but an ongoing experience, one that is both personal and communal. As God works in us, He also works through us, bringing about transformation in the world around us. The new thing He is doing is not only for our benefit, but for the good of all creation. This renewal, therefore, is not a solitary event, but a part of the larger story of God's redemptive work in the world. And as we participate in this process, we become co-laborers with God, bringing His new thing to life in the world. Faith amidst change is one of the most challenging yet profoundly rewarding aspects of the Christian journey. As God begins to do a new thing in our lives, we often find ourselves in unfamiliar territory, facing changes that feel unsettling, uncertain, and sometimes even uncomfortable. It is in these moments when everything around us is shifting that faith becomes not just a passive belief, but an active trust in God's goodness and sovereignty. To walk by faith during times of change is to place our trust not in the stability of our circumstances, but in the unchanging nature of God Himself. The foundation of this faith is the understanding that God is not taken by surprise by the changes in our lives. While we may experience uncertainty and confusion, God sees the end from the beginning. He knows where the new thing He is doing is leading us, even when we cannot yet perceive it. This truth is crucial to maintaining faith during times of change. It reminds us that we do not walk through life alone, and that every change, even those that are difficult or painful, is part of His divine plan. It is a plan that, despite how it may appear at times, is ultimately for our good. Even when we do not understand the reasons for the changes we face, we are called to trust in the one who is orchestrating them. Faith amidst change also means holding on to the promises of God, even when the path ahead is unclear. In times of transition, it can be easy to become overwhelmed by the unknown, to focus on the fears and doubts that arise when everything around us feels unstable. Yet faith calls us to focus on what is certain: God's promises. Scripture reminds us that God is faithful and that He will never leave us nor forsake us. These promises are not conditional upon our circumstances. They are unconditional assurances of God's constant presence and care. Holding on to these promises anchors us during times of uncertainty, giving us the strength to continue moving forward, even when we cannot see what lies ahead. Faith during times of change requires patience. The new thing God is doing in our lives may not unfold in the timeline we expect. Often it takes time for us to fully understand and appreciate the new season God is bringing us into. It is easy to become frustrated when change is slow or when the results are not immediately evident. Yet faith teaches us that the process is as important as the outcome. Through patience, we learn to trust that God's timing is perfect and that He is working in ways that we may not see or understand right away. In this process, we are shaped and refined, preparing us for the new thing that is coming. Faith amidst change also involves surrender. To trust God fully during times of change means surrendering our own plans, desires, and expectations to Him. We must release our grip on the things we thought would bring us security and comfort, and open ourselves to the new thing God is doing. This surrender does not mean passivity or resignation. It means actively choosing to trust in God's plan, even when it differs from our own. It means allowing Him to guide us into new ways of living, thinking, and being, even when it requires letting go of the old. Surrendering to God's plan brings a peace that surpasses understanding, knowing that His ways are higher than ours and that He is faithful to fulfill the good purposes He has for us. In times of change, faith is not merely a belief in God's existence. It is a belief in His character, His goodness, and His ability to bring about the transformation He has promised. It is through faith that we can embrace the new thing He is doing, trusting that it is part of His larger purpose for our lives, and that we are being shaped and prepared for something greater than we could ever imagine. Faith allows us to move forward in confidence, knowing that no matter what changes come our way, God is with us every step of the journey. Spiritual growth is a dynamic and ongoing journey that reflects the heart of what it means to be God's chosen ones. It is a process that never truly ends, for as we grow in faith, we are continually shaped, refined, and molded into the image of Christ. This journey of growth is not about achieving perfection or arriving at a final destination, but rather about faithfully walking in the direction of God's calling, being transformed along the way by His grace. As God is doing a new thing, spiritual growth becomes the means by which we actively engage with, and participate in that transformation. One of the essential aspects of spiritual growth is the understanding that it is a process that takes time. Just as a seed grows slowly into a tree, spiritual growth is often gradual and unfolds in stages. It is easy to desire immediate results, especially in a world that values quick success and visible outcomes. But in the realm of faith, growth requires patience and perseverance. We are not instantaneously made perfect, nor is spiritual maturity an overnight achievement. Instead, it is cultivated over time as we yield to God's transforming work in our lives. This growth is often marked by small victories and quiet moments of change, where we begin to notice shifts in our hearts, our attitudes, and our actions. These subtle changes are signs that God is at work, nurturing us towards something greater. Spiritual growth also involves an ongoing willingness to be stretched and challenged. Just as physical growth often comes with discomfort, spiritual growth too is accompanied by moments of tension and difficulty. God's work in us is not always easy. It may require us to confront our weaknesses, face our fears, and relinquish control over parts of our lives we would rather hold on to. This discomfort is not to be feared, for it is through these challenges that we are refined. We are shaped by the trials we face, and as we persevere, our faith deepens and our character matures. God uses these challenges as a means of purifying us, making us more resilient and more dependent on His strength rather than our own. An important part of spiritual growth is learning to surrender to God's will, even when it conflicts with our own desires or expectations. This surrender is not about passivity, it is about actively choosing to trust God's plan above our own. Growth requires that we lay down our plans, dreams, and ambitions and allow God to take the lead. We learn that His ways are higher than ours, and that His timing, though sometimes difficult to understand, is always perfect. This act of surrender is both humbling and liberating, as we realize that our lives are not our own to control, but are meant to be lived in submission to God's greater purposes. In this surrender we experience true freedom, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. Spiritual growth is also deeply relational. It is not a solitary endeavor, but one that is meant to be lived out in community with others. The process of growing in faith is enriched and deepened by the relationships we cultivate with fellow believers. Through the encouragement, accountability, and shared wisdom of others, we are better equipped to navigate the challenges of our journey. God often uses the people in our lives to refine us, to challenge us, and to help us see things from different perspectives. The body of Christ is a vital part of our spiritual growth, and through our connections with one another we are strengthened and supported in our pursuit of becoming more like Christ. Spiritual growth is about becoming more Christ-like, reflecting His love, His humility, His patience, and His wisdom in all areas of our lives. As we grow, we begin to align our desires with God's desires, our will with His will, and our lives with His eternal purpose. This growth, though it may be accompanied by struggles and challenges, is always towards something greater, toward the fulfillment of the new thing God is doing in us and through us. It is a journey that requires commitment, faith, and perseverance, but it is also a journey filled with joy, peace, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing we are growing into the people God has always meant for us to be. In conclusion, God is indeed doing a new thing in the lives of His chosen ones, and this divine work is far more than a mere change of circumstances. It is a profound, transformative journey. As we step into the new thing God is bringing about, we are invited into a process of deep renewal, a process that reshapes us from the inside out. This transformation is not always immediate or easy, but it is a work of grace, one that requires our faith, patience, surrender, and active participation. As we embrace this new thing, we must remember that being chosen by God is not a passive experience. It is an invitation to become part of His grand redemptive story, a story that unfolds through us and extends to the world around us. Our faith amidst change is the anchor that allows us to trust in God's perfect plan, even when the path ahead is unclear. And as we grow spiritually, we move ever closer to the fullness of what God has destined for us, knowing that our growth, while sometimes slow and uncomfortable, is essential to the new thing He is doing. Through faith, patience, and a willingness to be transformed, we become not just recipients of God's grace, but active participants in His unfolding purpose. This new thing which God is doing in our lives is not only for our own benefit, but for the good of the world. It is a calling to reflect His love, His goodness, and His purpose in every area of our lives. And as we walk this path, we can be assured that He is with us every step of the way, guiding us toward the fullness of His plan for us.